The humid Florida air of July 2001 clung heavy and sweet, thick with the scent of jasmine and salt, a typical summer evening in Palm Beach. For Liam and Chloe Sterling, 16-year-old twins, it was another ordinary Tuesday. Their lives, defined by the sprawling opulence of their father Richard Sterling's oceanfront mansion, were a gilded cage of privilege and expectation. Richard, a real estate titan whose name adorned half the luxury high-rises from Miami to Jupiter, was rarely home before dark, perpetually chasing the next multi-million-dollar deal. Eleanor, their mother, a woman sculpted by charity galas and afternoon bridge games, navigated their world with a grace that barely concealed a quiet desperation for a life less scrutinized. Liam, with his restless energy and an easy, disarming smile, was the outgoing twin, the one who charmed teachers and talked his way out of trouble. He dreamed of surfing in Costa Rica, a world away from the manicured lawns and hushed tones of their home. Chloe, on the other hand, possessed a quiet intensity, her dark eyes often lost in thought, a sketchbook always close at hand. She found solace in the wilder fringes of their property, sketching the gnarled roots of banyan trees and the fleeting patterns of light on the Atlantic. Their bond was telepathic in its intimacy, a shared language of glances and knowing smiles that excluded the adults around them. That Tuesday evening, July 17th, began like any other. Dinner was a formal affair, punctuated by Richard's distracted comments about a new acquisition and Eleanor's gentle prodding for details about their day at Palm Beach Day Academy's summer session. After dinner, the twins retreated to their shared wing of the mansion. Liam was sprawled on his bed, earbuds in, scrolling through early internet forums on a bulky desktop computer, a far cry from the sleek devices of today. Chloe sat by her window, the warm breeze ruffling her hair, sketching a stormy sky as lightning flickered far out over the ocean. They had plans to meet friends at a local diner, the Dolphin Grill, known for its classic rock jukebox and greasy burgers, a small rebellion against their parents' curated world. "You ready, Chloe?" Liam's voice was muffled by his earbuds as he pulled them out. "Jesse and Mike are probably there already." Chloe sighed, closing her sketchbook. "Just 5 more minutes, Liam. This sky is incredible." He rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Your art can wait, the greasy fries cannot." They left the house around 8:30 p.m., slipping past the dozing security guard in the gatehouse. Liam drove their shared Ford Explorer, a gift from their father, its tires crunching on the gravel driveway. The last anyone saw of them, they were turning onto South Ocean Boulevard, heading north towards town, their laughter echoing briefly in the summer night. The first hint of something amiss wasn't a scream or a crash, but silence. An unnatural, suffocating silence that descended upon the Sterling mansion just before dawn. Eleanor awoke, her internal clock accustomed to her children's late returns, but also attuned to their specific sounds, the soft closing of a car door, the muffled footsteps in the hall. None came. She checked their rooms. Empty beds, neatly made. Her heart began a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. Richard, roused by her growing panic, made a few calls. The Dolphin Grill had closed hours ago. No one had seen them leave. Their friends, Jesse and Mike, confirmed the twins never showed up. By 7 a.m., the fear was a tangible entity, a cold dread seeping into every corner of the lavish home. Richard, his usual composure fractured, called the Palm Beach Police Department. Detective Maria Rodriguez, a woman whose stern features belied a deeply empathetic nature, took the call. The initial assessment was typical for a wealthy teenage disappearance. Runaways, kids from affluent families often rebelled, sought attention, but Rodriguez had a gut feeling. The Sterling twins weren't known for wild escapades. They were good kids, albeit privileged. The Ford Explorer was found later that morning, abandoned on a dirt track leading into the expansive, wild preserve known as Grassy Waters Everglades Preserve, miles west of Palm Beach. The doors were unlocked, the keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no footprints other than the twins' own, which faded quickly into the swampy terrain. Inside, Chloe's art supplies were neatly stacked on the passenger seat. Liam's worn baseball cap lay on the dashboard. It looked as if they had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. The investigation began in earnest. Palm Beach, a town usually preoccupied with society gossip and charity galas, was gripped by the vanishing. Media vans descended, their satellite dishes pointing like hungry vultures towards the Sterling estate. Richard Sterling, a man who meticulously controlled his public image, appeared on national television, his usually impassive face contorted with raw anguish, pleading for his children's return. Eleanor, fragile and withdrawn, remained largely out of the public eye, her grief a private, suffocating burden. Detective Rodriguez and her team delved into the Sterling family's life, scrutinizing every detail. Richard's business dealings were put under a microscope. Had a disgruntled business partner sought revenge, a failed deal. The real estate world was cutthroat, but no credible threats emerged. They interviewed friends, teachers, classmates. Was there a secret boyfriend or girlfriend, any drug use, any hidden troubles? The twins' lives seemed remarkably clean, almost too perfect. Liam had a reputation as a prankster, Chloe as a dreamer, but neither had any significant enemies or dark secrets that hinted at a self-orchestrated disappearance. The search for the twins was exhaustive. Search and rescue teams, aided by volunteers, combed grassy waters, its dense sawgrass and cypress swamps an unforgiving labyrinth. Helicopters flew overhead, their whirring blades cutting through the oppressive humidity. Dogs sniffed the ground, but the scent trails quickly dissipated in the heat and moisture. Divers explored canals and murky ponds. Nothing, no trace. It was as if the twins had simply evaporated into the humid Florida air. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The initial flurry of activity slowed to a grinding halt. The tip lines, once ringing nonstop with speculative calls, grew silent. The media attention waned, replaced by new tragedies and sensational headlines. The Sterlings hired private investigators, offered $1 million reward, but still nothing. The case of the vanished Sterling twins, once a national obsession, slowly began to fade into the chilling annals of unsolved mysteries. The years that followed were a testament to the corrosive power of unresolved grief. The Sterling mansion, once vibrant, became a tomb of memory. Richard threw himself into work, his empire expanding even as his personal life crumbled. He aged dramatically, his sharp features softening into lines of perpetual sorrow. Eleanor retreated further, her once bright eyes clouded with a permanent haze of sorrow. Their marriage, once a facade of polite affection, withered under the strain, two broken people living separate lives within the same grand walls. They moved through their days like ghosts, haunted by the specter of their missing children, forever wondering, forever hoping for a phone call that never came. Their once close circle of friends dwindled, uncomfortable with the lingering sadness that permeated their lives. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries of the disappearance, each was a fresh wound, a reminder of what was lost. The twins remained 16 in their parents' minds, frozen in time, their futures stolen. 8 years crawled by. It was August 2009. The economic recession had hit Florida hard, and even the Sterling empire had felt the pinch. Richard Sterling, ever the opportunist, was in the process of offloading some of his undeveloped land holdings, particularly large, remote parcels that had sat fallow for decades, purchased purely for speculative future development. One such parcel, a sprawling 300-acre tract of overgrown scrubland and pine flatwoods west of Jupiter, near the fringes of the Du Bois Park area, had been on the market for years. It was remote, accessed by a single, winding dirt road, miles from the nearest paved street. The land was part of an old, neglected trust held by a subsidiary, a detail so obscure even Richard sometimes forgot about it. Frank Miller was a security guard for a property management company contracted by Sterling Holdings. His job that sweltering August afternoon was to conduct a routine perimeter check on the Jupiter parcel, assessing for squatters, illegal dumping, or potential environmental hazards before a prospective buyer's visit. Frank was a man of routine, methodical, and observant. He drove his battered pickup truck slowly along the overgrown access road, the oppressive heat shimmering off the dusty track. The air conditioning in his truck had given out weeks ago, and sweat trickled down his back, dampening his work shirt. He noticed a section of the perimeter fence, old chain link, partially collapsed, not unusual for such a remote property. He parked and stepped out, the ground crunching under his boots, the air thick with the buzzing of insects and the distant croak of frogs. As he approached the damaged fence, he saw something else. A faint trail, barely discernible, leading deeper into the dense underbrush, away from the main access road. It wasn't an animal trail. It looked too deliberate, too straight. Curiosity, or perhaps an ingrained sense of duty, compelled him to follow it. The trail wound through thick palmetto scrub and tangled vines, branches clawing at his arms and face. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of pines and oaks, casting the path in a perpetual, eerie twilight. After about 10 minutes of pushing through the undergrowth, he smelled it. A faint metallic odor like stale rust and something else, something organic and disturbing. He also noticed a shift in the flora. The trees seemed to grow closer together, forming a natural, almost deliberate curtain. Then he saw it. Barely visible through the foliage, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a small, crudely constructed structure. It wasn't a shed or a hunting blind. It was too low, too squat, built from salvaged lumber and corrugated metal sheets, partially dug into the earth like a bunker. It looked like something built by someone desperate to remain hidden. His heart began to pound a little harder. This was beyond illegal dumping. This felt wrong. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively going to the heavy maglite on his belt, though it offered little comfort against the unknown. The structure had no windows, just a heavy, padlocked wooden door, warped and weathered. A rusty, makeshift vent pipe poked out from one side of the roof, disappearing into the dense foliage above. The metallic smell was stronger here, mixed with the damp earth and something acrid. Frank tried the padlock. It was old, rusted solid. He pulled on the door. It didn't budge. He stepped back, surveying the small, chilling building. As he scanned the immediate area, his eyes caught something glinting in the dirt near the base of the wall. He knelt, brushing away leaves and pine needles. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, intricately engraved. He picked it up. His thumb brushed against the cold metal, and with a soft click it sprang open. Inside, two miniature, faded photographs. On one side, a smiling teenage boy, his grin wide and carefree. On the other, a girl with striking, intelligent eyes, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Frank Miller's blood ran cold. He knew those faces. He'd seen them plastered on news channels, on missing persons posters that had haunted Florida for years. Liam and Chloe Sterling. His hands began to tremble. He fumbled for his cell phone, his fingers slick with sweat. He was miles from anywhere and the signal was weak, but he managed to dial 911. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper when he finally spoke. I think I found something. On the old Sterling land near Jupiter Farms. I think it's the Sterling twins. Within hours, the remote parcel was swarming with law enforcement. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, Jupiter PD, and eventually, the FBI. Detective Maria Rodriguez, now a seasoned lieutenant, arrived on scene, her face grim. She recognized the locket immediately. It had been Chloe's, a gift from her grandmother. The discovery sent a shockwave through the Sterling family and the state of Florida. The cold case, for 8 agonizing years a festering wound, had suddenly, horrifyingly, been torn open. Forensic teams meticulously processed the scene. The bunker, built with a strange efficiency, revealed its secrets slowly. The padlock was cut. The heavy door swung open with a groan of rusty hinges, revealing an oppressive darkness and a wave of stagnant, heavy air. Inside, the space was small, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, with a low ceiling. It was bare earth floor, compacted and dry. The air inside was thick with dust, the smell of decay, and something else indescribable, a scent of long-abandoned life. There in the center of the room were 2 crude, elevated platforms, fashioned from more salvaged wood, serving as makeshift beds. On one, a small, worn pillow, a faded blanket. On the other, a child's t-shirt, too small for a teenager, and a single, well-preserved leather-bound sketchbook. Rodriguez's heart hammered. Chloe's sketchbook. This was indisputable. The pages were filled with detailed, desperate drawings. Scenes of the bunker's interior, the rough texture of the walls, the single vent pipe, endless loops of patterns, and finally, stark, abstract images of terror and confinement. Some pages had dates scrawled in the margins, meticulous recordings of the passing days, stretching for months, then years. The last dated entry was November 14, 2002, over a year after their disappearance. They had been alive. Trapped near the sketchbook, carefully placed, was a collection of small, carved wooden figures. Animals, birds, a tiny, almost crude human figure. Liam's handiwork. He had always been good with his hands. It was clear the twins had tried to maintain some semblance of sanity, some form of expression in their horrific prison, but there were no human remains, not initially. The floor was carefully sifted, the surrounding earth meticulously examined. It wasn't until a cadaver dog, a specially trained 9, indicated on a specific spot just outside the bunker, under a freshly laid layer of earth that seemed to have been disturbed more recently, that the true horror began to unfold. They excavated, and there, buried shallowly, were the skeletal remains of 2 individuals, small, fragile, unmistakably human. Forensic anthropologists quickly confirmed them to be a male and a female, consistent with the age of Liam and Chloe Sterling. DNA samples would be the final, heartbreaking confirmation. The revelation sent shockwaves far beyond Palm Beach. The twins hadn't run away. They hadn't been randomly abducted and murdered. They had been held. Imprisoned for over a year in a hidden bunker on land their own father nominally owned, a forgotten corner of his vast empire. The horror was almost unbearable. Who would do this? And why bury them just outside, so close to their prison? The new investigation, spearheaded by Rodriguez, was a relentless pursuit of the truth. Every person who had access to the property, every employee of Sterling Holdings, every contractor who might have known about the remote parcel was scrutinized. The dates in Chloe's sketchbook were critical. They had been alive until late 2002. This meant the initial investigation had missed something fundamental, or the perpetrators were incredibly sophisticated. The focus shifted to the property itself. Who knew about this specific, obscure parcel of land? Richard Sterling had bought it decades ago, almost as an afterthought, through a complex web of shell corporations and trusts. Only a handful of people in his inner circle would have even known it existed. Arthur Finch, Richard's longtime, intensely loyal legal counsel, was among them. Finch had managed most of Richard's remote land acquisitions. He was a quiet, unassuming man, fiercely protective of the Sterling family, almost like a shadow. Rodriguez remembered Finch from the initial investigation. He had been cooperative, if somewhat reserved. Now, with the new evidence, he was brought in for extensive questioning. He maintained his composure, answering every question precisely, but Rodriguez noted a subtle tremor in his hands, a slight deflection in his eyes when the Jupiter land was mentioned. The breakthrough came not from direct testimony, but from meticulous digital forensics, a field vastly more advanced in 2009 than 2001. Investigators traced property taxes, maintenance contracts, and a specific, unusual order for lumber and corrugated metal, placed in late 2000, delivered to a remote address in Jupiter that matched the Sterling parcel's coordinates. The order had been placed under a false name, but the payment had been processed through a defunct subsidiary account of Sterling Holdings, an account only a few trusted individuals had access to. Arthur Finch was one of them. Further digging into Finch's financial records revealed a series of increasingly desperate bets on obscure stocks and a spiraling debt problem that began in the late 1990s. He had been embezzling small sums from Sterling Holdings for years, growing bolder as his debts mounted, but it wasn't enough. He needed a larger, quicker payout. The motive, when it finally emerged through Finch's eventual tormented confession, was a grotesque distortion of loyalty and desperation. Finch hadn't intended to kill the twins. He had orchestrated their abduction, hidden them on the forgotten Sterling property, and intended to extort a massive sum from Richard, enough to clear his crippling debts and disappear. He believed Richard, consumed by grief, would pay anything. He knew the hidden parcel was perfect for concealment, a needle in the vast haystack of Richard's holdings. The abduction itself had been deceptively simple. Finch, leveraging his trusted position, had approached the twins at the Dolphin Grill parking lot, feigning an urgent message from their father, an emergency that required them to come with him immediately. Naive and trusting, they had followed him to their Explorer, driven it to the remote property, believing they were going to meet their father. Once there, the facade dropped. Finch, armed, had forced them into the bunker, promising their release once their father paid. The details of their captivity were horrific. Finch visited them periodically, bringing them food and water, meager comforts. He had underestimated Richard's resilience, or perhaps his inability to be extorted. Richard, despite his anguish, had been advised by the FBI not to pay any ransom until proof of life was established, proof Finch could never provide without risking exposure. The ransom demands sent anonymously were too vague, too unspecific. Richard suspected a disgruntled former partner, not his trusted lawyer. As months stretched into a year, Finch grew desperate. His debts were mounting, his scheme unraveling. The twins, confined in the dark, isolated bunker, began to sicken. Their food supplies were dwindling. Finch, overwhelmed by panic and the sheer enormity of his crime, made a series of fatal decisions. He began to fear they would be found, or that they would die of neglect, revealing his involvement. He knew the truth would destroy the Sterlings, and ironically, in his twisted loyalty, he wanted to protect Richard from the deeper shame of his trusted confidant being the perpetrator. On November 14, 2002, the last date in Chloe's sketchbook, Finch visited the bunker one final time. He had brought them a contaminated food supply, an act of slow, deliberate poisoning, a cowardly attempt to silence them and erase his crime without direct confrontation. Liam, already weak, succumbed first. Chloe, ravaged by illness and grief, likely died shortly after, her last conscious act sketching, documenting, leaving a desperate trail of breadcrumbs in her final hours. After they died, Finch, in a final act of desecration, buried them shallowly outside the bunker, covering the grave with fresh earth and camouflaging it as best he could, believing the remote land would never be disturbed. He then wiped any physical trace of himself from the bunker and the surrounding area, convinced he had erased all evidence. Arthur Finch was arrested. His confession, agonizingly detailed, brought a chilling closure to the Sterling family, but no peace. The man who had been a fixture in their lives for decades, a trusted friend and confidant, was responsible for the unimaginable. Richard Sterling, already a broken man, had to grapple not only with the loss of his children, but with the profound betrayal by someone he considered family. Eleanor Sterling finally broke, her fragile composure shattering irrevocably. The Sterling mansion now stands silent, a monument to a gilded age and a haunting tragedy. Richard and Eleanor rarely leave its grounds. The vibrant memories of Liam and Chloe are forever intertwined with the unspeakable horror of their final days, a stark reminder that even within the most privileged lives, darkness can lurk in the most trusted corners. The case of the Sterling twins became a cautionary tale, a chilling testament to the hidden depravity that can masquerade as loyalty and the devastating, long shadow cast by unchecked greed. The Florida sun still shines bright, but for the Sterling family, it forever illuminates a profound and unforgiving darkness.